There are various routes to WWE, from attending a tryout to excelling in another sport to, just showing up one day in trunks and boots and trying to bluff your way into the Royal Rumble. One tried and true method is, of course, making a name for yourself outside of WWE, whether that's in another major organization or as a weekend warrior on the independent circuit. The cream always rises to the top, and taking the hard road, plugging away for poor payoffs while traveling the highways and byways in unglamorous conditions, gives a performer experience and builds character that can be essential for surviving, if not thriving, in the big time. Once upon a time, the term indie darling was something to be sneered at, as WWE were more likely to sign a former American football player or glamour model to a contract, but there has been a mentality shift in recent years as WWE realized that they could make stars out of those that paid their dues in the minor leagues. We've seen many of these men and women become genuine staples of the company in recent years, but it doesn't always work out that way. For various reasons, those that enjoyed being a big fish in a small pond end up looking like a tadpole in the Atlantic Ocean when they finally make it to the world's most famous sports entertainment enterprise. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 indie sensations that flopped in WWE. Join us. Number 10, Chris Hero. Chris Hero was well-travelled and very experienced by the time he made it to WWE, having been a standout on the American independent and international scenes for over a decade when he put pen to paper in February 2012. He had previously enjoyed much success in IWA Mid-South, Combat Zone Wrestling, Chikara, Ring of Honor, and Pro Wrestling Noah, some of his best work coming while teaming with Claudio Castagnoli, now better known as Cesaro, as the Kings of Wrestling. A true student of the game, Chris Hero was sent to Developmental League Florida Championship Wrestling, where he debuted under the new name of Cassius Ohno. He lasted 21 months in FCW and then the rebranded NXT, the highlight of his time there being a bout with mentor William Regal before he departed on good terms. After another few years doing the indie thing, Hero re-signed with WWE and returned to NXT and then NXT UK in late 2016. During this second spell, he was very much seen as a stepping stone for newcomers and was primarily used to put over talent that the company had bigger plans for. He was let go in April 2020 due to the COVID cutbacks, having won no titles across the company's developmental brands and, lamentably, failing to reach his true potential. Number 9, Austin Aries. Austin Aries arrived in WWE with a dual reputation of being a first-class professional wrestler and a top-draw twat. A-Double had busted his backside in Ring of Honor and TNA for years, winning both companies' world titles, as well as a multitude of other prizes during his various stints in either organization. There was a sense that he had done everything there was to do in the companies when it was announced that he had signed with WWE in early 2016. Reporting for duty in NXT, the highlight of his run on the third brand was a surly bout with Shinsuke Nakamura at NXT TakeOver The End. Following a nasty orbital bone injury suffered at the hands of the King of Strong Style in a different match, Aries moved to the commentary desk and began calling the action for the Cruiserweight division on Raw and 205 Live. This led to a feud with Cruiserweight champion Neville and a trio of matches at WrestleMania 33, Payback, and Extreme Rules. Aries failed to win the title, however, and was released in July of 2017. Outside of the Neville and Nakamura matches, Aries didn't do a whole lot during his time in WWE, and after his release, rumors of backstage issues with his fellow wrestlers and creative staff spread. Quelle surprise. Number 8, Reckless Youth. Unless you were trading tapes in the late 90s, you might not be too familiar with Reckless Youth. The former backyard wrestler eventually trained with Larry Sharp and Al Snow and began getting booked around the Northeast United States, wowing audiences with his audacious high-flying style. Dubbed the King of the Indies, Reckless Youth, real name Tom Carter, received a look from WWE in 1999, a big deal considering the Attitude Era wave they were riding at the time. He signed a developmental deal after wrestling several dark matches at TV tapings and reported for work in WWE's various feeder territories, including Memphis and IWA in Puerto Rico. In Memphis, he worked a program with William Regal, who was getting ready to make his WWE comeback, earning a number of victories over the NXT general manager. Not too long after that, however, he was released from his deal and returned to the Indies. Reports vary as to whether he was let go or requested the release himself, but what can be said with some certainty is that Reckless Youth probably came around 10 or 15 years too early. Post-WWE, he went back to the Indies and was heavily involved with the formation of Chikara, though he hasn't been involved in the business since 2010 and now has a full-time career in accounting. Number 7, Christopher Daniels. Christopher Daniels has been absolutely everywhere. Now in his 50s and still going strong in AEW, the Fallen Angel has seen and done it all in wrestling, beginning with his spell on the American independent circuit in the 90s. The scene wasn't as bustling as it would become, but Daniels stuck out as a talent and WWE took notice, signing him to a developmental deal in 1998. He was part of a Funkin' Dojo class that included Kurt Angle and Shawn Stasiak, and he worked some dark matches and as an enhancement talent on shows like Shotgun Saturday Night, Sunday Night Heat, and Jacked. Despite being as smooth as silk and able to have a good match with just about anyone, Daniels never really got a look in during his time at Titan, most likely because of his smaller stature. Apart from that time, he was briefly considered as the potential higher power during the storyline between The Undertaker and Steve Austin, that is. Obviously, that didn't happen, but it's interesting to think of what might have been had they decided to go in that direction. In the end, Daniels turned his attention back towards the indie and international scenes, being one of the consummates for promotions like Ring of Honor and MLW, as well as being around since the very early days of TNA. Number 6, the American Wolves. As Triple H's NXT came to fruition and WWE began to gobble up the best talent from around the world in order to bolster the burgeoning brand, most assumed that the recently out of contract Eddie Edwards and Davey Richards would be two of the names added to the growing roster. The American Wolves, as both singles and as a tag team, had tore up the independent circuit, especially in home promotion Ring of Honor. Rather than being signed outright by WWE, Richards and Edwards were instead invited to a week-long tryout camp at the Performance Center in Orlando in November of 2013. They were deemed good enough to make an appearance on NXT television, billed as John Cahill and Derek Billington, a tribute to Tom Dynamite Kid Billington, who had clearly inspired Richards, aka the American Pitbulls, as they challenged NXT Tag Champs The Ascension in a non-title losing effort. However, a scary botch during the match forced Triple H to cut not only the bout, but their tryout short, sending them home without an offer. Not that they cried about it for too long or anything, as they debuted for TNA just a couple of months later, where they would go on to become 5-time tag team champions. Number 5, Colt Cabana. To truly be a success in WWE, you need to be versatile. It's not just about having the best match or doing the coolest moves after all. You need to forge a connection with the audience, something that comes through more than just the bell-to-bell action. Your Daniel Bryans, CM Punks, and Kevin Owenses can all deliver between the ropes, no doubt, but their popularity and staying power comes just as much from their personalities, microphone skills, and character work. When Colt Cabana signed with WWE in 2007, there was a widespread hope that he would be a natural fit, especially as WWE transitioned into a more family-friendly product. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Cabana got over on the indies not with brainbusters and ass-eye moonsaults, but because he was an entertainer and could utilize comedy and other unique styles of wrestling, such as the old British world of sport, into his routine. Regrettably, WWE did nothing with Punk's pre-lawsuit pal, chopping him out on television in short matches to the Brian Kendrick, the Great Khali, and Umaga before unceremoniously canning him. It's amazing that WWE couldn't come up with anything better than Scotty Goldman for Cabana to do, as he would have been an asset as a commentator, trainer, or manager if they had no plans for him as a wrestler. He's proven himself many times over on the independent scene since his 2009 release and is currently enjoying life in AEW. Number 4, Paul London. Paul London, along with the Amazing Red and AJ Styles, was one of the most spectacular high flyers on the indie scene in the early 2000s. Known for his beautiful shooting star press and unique moves like the drop salt and mushroom stomp, London's awe-inspiring performances regularly earned him the chant "Please don't die" from the Ring of Honor crowd. The Texas native was a hit in ROH, TNA, and in Japan for 0-1, but traded it all for WWE when he signed a contract in mid-2003. 3. In a lot of ways, it's hard to call London a WWE flop. He was on the books for 5 years and won the Cruiserweight and SmackDown tag team titles during that time. But considering he had a natural talent that had people pegging him as the next Rob Van Dam or even Shawn Michaels, his WWE run can be considered a huge disappointment. So, what happened? Well, London is another case of coming a generation too soon. His style wasn't the in thing, and performers of his size were routinely underutilized back then. He also had to fight backstage politics, like the time Vince McMahon outlawed his signature moves, and many felt like he didn't take the job seriously enough to get pushed, the tipping point coming when he was shown smiling like the village idiot as the boss walked to his demise on Raw. Number 3, Sammy Callihan. Sammy Callihan forged his reputation not as a premier technician or high flyer, but due to his exploits in the ultra-violent CZW. With his penchant for pain, wild expressions, and eye-catching appearance, he certainly stood out amongst the pack. Callihan signed with WWE in 2012, and the bad omens started almost immediately. According to the man himself, he didn't wrestle for the first 6 months of his contract, despite being told he would be put on TV right away. Things went from bad to worse when he broke his leg, necessitating another 1.5 years on the sidelines. Callihan and Dusty Rhodes had created and meticulously outlined a hacker character for Callihan under the name Solomon Crow, but the idea quickly became muddled by the time he was due to debut and was subsequently dropped. A handful of lukewarm matches followed, and it was clear that Callihan didn't know who he was supposed to be, and the fans reacted accordingly. With a lot of pent-up frustration boiling up inside of him, Callihan bet on himself and asked for his release, returning to the indie scene as the worldwide desperado and rebuilding his pre-WWE name and identity. WWE missed the boat with him, but since he's still just in his early 30s, he could find his way back there for a redemption run in the future. Number 2, Kenta. The hard-hitting Kenta, spelled in all capital letters because I assume you're supposed to scream it, is not necessarily an indie sensation, at least not in his native land. A graduate of the All Japan Pro Wrestling Dojo, Kenta was one of the top stars of the reincarnated Pro Wrestling Noah, which could claim to be the first or second biggest promotion in the land of the rising sun at various points in the 2000s. So while some on this list were scrapping in front of 15 people in a high school gym, Kenta was more likely to be found fighting over major titles in the Tokyo Dome. He did have some independent exposure in Ring of Honor, however, being invited into the group thanks to the two companies' working relationship and having some spectacular matches with Loki, Bryan Danielson, and others. WWE made a huge deal of his 2014 acquisition, with the newly christened Hideo Itami signing his contract during an Osaka live event alongside Hulk Hogan and Jimmy Hart. His time in NXT was plagued by injury though, and he was sadly unable to show a fraction of what had made him such a hot commodity. Following a brief tenure on 205 Live, Kenta left WWE and later remarked that his days working there were the most frustrating of his life. He's done alright since. Number 1, Loki. Loki was in that same early 2000s group as Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, and Christopher Daniels as someone who was pegged as a future star. His palpable intensity, hybrid style, and no-nonsense approach to the task at hand all differentiated him. He was one of the breakout stars of early days Ring of Honor and worked extensively in Japan and for TNA when his schedule permitted. The World Warrior was never hurting for bookings, but he did have a tendency to burn bridges and fall out with promotions before long, the common accusation being that he perhaps took himself a tad too seriously. He signed with WWE in 2008 and was renamed Caval, but injuries kept him out of the ring for a while, with the former Ring of Honor champion finally making his televised WWE debut as a contestant in the second season of NXT during its game show phase, where he was given Lay Cool as his mentor. Something tells me that might have been a rib, you know? He won the competition and moved over to the SmackDown roster. As per his NXT victory, he was given a title shot, choosing to face Intercontinental Champion Dolph Ziggler at the 2010 Survivor Series, which he lost. It became readily apparent that WWE had no ideas for him, and after jobbing him out to just about everyone, they released him on December 23rd. Merry Christmas, Loki. Ugh.